An ordinary-looking Australian man was bowed to by thousands of doctors around the world. And his story proves that a humble person from a small town can save millions of children's lives without being a doctor or a scientist, just by regularly doing something that anyone can do. James Harrison was born in the small town of Junee, Australia, and lived a long and meaningful life, 88 years. In February 2025, the medical world went into mourning when news broke of his peaceful passing in his sleep. But why was this seemingly ordinary man called the man with the golden arm, and why are millions of mothers grateful to him, even though they never met him? James's story began with tragedy when he was just 14 years old. The teenager underwent a serious chest surgery, and doctors fought desperately to save his life. To keep him alive, they gave him 13 liters of donated blood, an enormous amount, nearly 3 full blood replacements for the human body. Lying in a hospital bed between life and death, James made a promise to himself. If he survived, he would become a blood donor to repay the strangers who had saved his life. Unlike many promises made in moments of despair, James kept his word. As soon as he turned 18 in 1954, he went to a blood donation center and stretched out his arm for the first time. He had no idea that this simple act would mark the beginning of a 64-year-long journey of heroism. For the first 10 years, James simply donated blood regularly, considering it his personal duty. He never expected awards or recognition. He just quietly visited the donation center every few weeks, had a cup of tea with a biscuit after the procedure, and went home. But fate had a special mission in store for him. In the early 1960s, Australian scientists were desperate to solve a tragic medical problem. Thousands of newborn babies were dying from a mysterious disease in which their own mothers unknowingly became their killers. This happened when a woman with Rh-negative blood carried a baby with Rh-positive blood. The mother's body treated the baby's blood as foreign and started producing antibodies that attacked the baby's red blood cells. This deadly condition, called hemolytic disease, took the lives of every second baby affected by it. During a routine blood test, doctors discovered something incredible in James's blood. His plasma contained exceptionally strong and stable antibodies to the Rhd antigen. This was extremely rare. Only a few people in the world had such antibodies. But what was even more amazing was that these antibodies could be used to create a life-saving medicine, a vaccine that could prevent Rh disease. When doctors explained to James how valuable his blood was, he didn't hesitate for a second. "If my blood can save even one child, take as much as you need," he told them. But even he couldn't imagine the true scale of his future impact. James became the key donor in an experimental program. Using his plasma, scientists developed an injection, anti-D immunoglobulin, which was given to Rh-negative mothers. The results were beyond expectations. The treatment completely stopped the mother's body from producing harmful antibodies, preventing Rh disease from developing. Babies who were once doomed to die could now be born healthy. James's blood was so valuable that the Australian government insured his life for $1 million. For years, the entire country depended on a single person. His plasma was used to make the entire supply of this life-saving medicine in Australia. For James, donating plasma became a way of life. Every 3 weeks for 6 decades, he went to the blood donation center and stretched out his arm. Over the years, his right arm became covered in scars from endless needle pricks, hence the nickname, the man with the golden arm. But he wore these scars with pride, just as a soldier wears medals for bravery. The nurses at the donation center recalled that James never missed a single scheduled procedure. Even when he had a high fever, he still came and sat in the chair, waiting for his condition to improve enough to donate plasma. One winter, during a severe storm, when public transport was shut down and fallen trees blocked the roads, James walked 8 kilometers to the donation center, soaked to the bone but with his usual smile on his face. "I have an appointment today, and someone might need this plasma tomorrow," he simply told the astonished staff. Unlike many other donors, James felt a strange connection with the people who received his blood. When asked if he ever got bored sitting in the donor's chair for hours, he always replied, "I imagine future mothers who will be able to hold their healthy babies without fear, and that gives these hours a special meaning." Remarkably, James remained an incredibly humble man. He always said, "Don't call me a hero. The real heroes are the mothers who carry and raise these children. I just sit in a chair drink tea and watch TV while the machine collects my plasma. What kind of heroism is that? Doctors offered James compensation for his donations, but he firmly refused. You can't take money for saving lives, he insisted. When Australian television wanted to make a documentary about him, James agreed only on the condition that the film would encourage people to become donors. If at least 10 people come to donate blood after watching this film, then it was all worth it, he told the producers. James' colleagues at the factory, where he worked his entire life, said that he never boasted about his contributions. Many of them only found out about his golden arm from the news, not from him. When asked about it during lunch breaks, he would just jokingly reply, "I just sleep better than everyone else while they take my blood." One day, someone asked James if he ever thought about the millions of children he had saved. He smiled and said, "Every time I see a happy child with their mother on the street, I think, maybe this little one is here because of my plasma. That's the greatest reward for me." A remarkable event once took place at a hospital in Melbourne. A nurse, realizing that James Harrison himself had been admitted to the ward with a simple cold, gathered all the mothers with newborns from the RH incompatibility unit into the hallway. As James walked down the corridor, one by one, these women stood up and applauded him. Embarrassed, James tried to hurry past, but one of the mothers stepped forward, holding out her baby and said, "Please hold him. One day I will tell him that the man who made his birth possible held him in his arms." At that moment, tears welled up in the eyes of the tough Australian. Over time, James's popularity grew, and he was invited to speak at schools. He shared his story with children and explained the importance of helping others. "Never think that your help is insignificant," he told students. "I just stretched out my arm and donated blood, something almost any healthy adult can do. And the result? Millions of lives saved." And that reward grew with every donation. In May 2011, he made his 1,000th donation, setting a world record. The medical staff at the blood center organized a special ceremony for him. For the first time, doctors and staff lined up in 2 rows and bowed to James as he walked between them. A gesture of incredible respect in Australian culture. James himself was embarrassed by the attention and quickly sat down in his usual donor's chair. In the final years of his blood donation journey, James began experiencing age-related health issues. Doctors suggested that he reduce the frequency of his donations, but he insisted on keeping his usual schedule. "My body is used to giving blood every 3 weeks. Why change something that works?" he said. The nurses recalled that even when James looked pale and weak, his first question was always, "Will there be enough blood for all the mothers who need it?" On May 11, 2018, James made his final 1,173rd donation. At 81 years old, he had reached the maximum donor age allowed in Australia and had to stop at last. He called that day the saddest of his life. "My body can still give plasma, but the rules say I can't," he said bitterly to journalists. The night before his final donation, he hardly slept. So deeply was he affected by the thought that his lifelong mission was coming to an end. That day, dozens of mothers came to his last donation session with children of all ages, from newborns to adults. All of them owed him their lives. One woman, with tears in her eyes, approached James with her twin children and said, "My babies were born with severe RH disease, but they survived because of your plasma. Every year on their birthday, I silently thank you." Deeply moved, James said, "I hope someone breaks my record. That would mean there's another person out there saving lives." According to estimates by the Australian Red Cross, James Harrison's plasma and the life-saving medicine developed from it helped save the lives of 2.5 million babies. That's almost the population of an entire country, all thanks to one humble man who for 64 years donated blood every 3 weeks, doing something that anyone could do. To grasp the scale of his impact, imagine this. If all the children James saved stood in a line holding hands, their chain would stretch from Sydney to Perth, across the entire width of Australia. And if each of these children placed a single flower on his grave, it would form a mound as tall as a 10-story building. Australian doctors calculated that over his lifetime, James donated around 800 liters of blood and plasma. Given that an adult's body holds about 5 liters of blood, it means he had fully replaced his own blood more than 160 times to save others. This is an absolute record in medical history, one that is unlikely to ever be broken. Among the babies saved by James was his own grandson. His daughter Tracy, who was Rh negative, received the anti-D injection during pregnancy, the very same treatment created from her father's plasma. So James didn't just save millions of strangers' children, he also saved his own grandson. Tracy recalled the moment when she fully realized the significance of her father's donations. When she was pregnant and found out she had Rh negative blood, she was scared until her doctor reassured her. "Don't worry, we'll give you the anti-D injection. Do you know that your father is one of the main donors for this treatment?" She burst into tears, realizing that her own child would survive thanks to her father's sacrifice. After all those years of saving other people's children, he had unknowingly saved his own grandson as well. When James held his newborn grandson for the first time, he whispered, "You are alive because of people who donate blood." Never forget that. Tracy called that moment the most touching of her life, seeing her father hold a baby who had been saved by his own blood. In his final interview, James said, "My mother always told me, you can save a life without losing anything. If more people became donors, the world would be a much better place." On February 17, 2025, when 88-year-old James Harrison's heart stopped, thousands of doctors around the world bowed their heads to honor him. A man who, without any medical training, saved more children's lives than the world's greatest pediatricians. Across hospitals in Australia, medical staff gathered for solemn ceremonies, lowering their heads in tribute to the man with the golden arm, who proved that sometimes the most ordinary person can change the world, just by doing something that anyone has the power to do.